was a great build-up opener, by the way. Well done.
I'm excited.
Okay. Everybody have a gender?
Everybody has
Some
some.
people aren't sure. How many people identify as female? Male? Both? Both? Neither? What's happening? So gender is something that I have been personally interested in for a long time. Not since birth. This is like, I think it really wasn't something I started thinking about until my late 20s, early 30s. In a very sort of, in a deep way. You know, obviously I thought about being a girl and then being a woman and what that meant, and I read books, you know, at people's suggestion about, what was the one, oh God, the one about, anyway.
Our bodies are cells.
I think that was it.
Was it?
Yeah, but you know, so I was interested in what it meant to be a woman, and then there was this like noise about feminism. Also, for me, as a Gen Xer in the years that I was growing up, the noise was very subdued. Like our moms, like basically my mom's generation, the boomers, like burned bras, and really, you know, feminism was an important movement for them. But for my generation, it was like dark years. Growing up in the 70s and 80s was like very culturally, in America, sort of a culturally kind of sick and, what do you call it, like, there wasn't much substance to grasp onto. So we sort of like listened to pop music and watched Michael Jackson dance and like didn't think about these things all that much. So feminism is back in vogue, and also gender is a hot topic. So I'm going to, as I said, I have no authority to speak on the subject, and there are many people who could illuminate points that I'm going to make tonight much better than me. And we're also only going to scratch the surface of this topic. But I offer you this because I think it's really important that we investigate gender more deeply than we currently do in this culture and as a society. And being in the communications field especially, I mean, as you all know, I'm sort of in advertising and was totally in advertising for a while. And so much of the work behind the communications and the media machine is about figuring out, identifying gender roles and what women want and what men want, and there are myriad conversations that you will have if you go into a field like advertising. And now many other fields, I mean, if you go into finance, the question of how women invest, you know, differently than men. Like the gender issue is coming to a head in many, many different industries. So, so this has been my experience. So my interest, my professional interest in gender really sparked in around 2003. So I was working in advertising and a big international advertising agency, and we got into the proposal for A.B. Miller, S.A.B. Miller, which is, you know, all the beers are made by, many beers are made by S.A.B. Miller. And as part of the pitch, we had to demonstrate our knowledge of what men want. So I worked for a really remarkable woman at the time. She was kind of genius at striking up controversy. Very difficult to work for, very devil's wears Prada kind of boss. And so we put together a global survey called The Future of Men and fielded it, and it was a huge survey. It was, you know, I don't even know, 2,000 or 3,000 respondents around the world. And and the results came back, and there were all these really surprising responses. And I was in my 20s, I was 30, I was 30 at the time. Marion was 45. And I only mention that because I was I was still part of pop culture in a big way. I was still going to clubs, I was still out, I was still hanging out with lots of young creative people in New York City, and she wasn't. And so the results of the survey came back, and there were a lot of comments by men about their interest in grooming, their interest in appearance, a lot of vanity signals coming through that were sort of surprising. Then their responses to questions about emotional and relational issues were somewhat surprising also. Surprising enough that we all took a look at the survey results, and I can't remember them all right now, but there were a few questions where we were like, God, these men are behaving like women. This looks like women. So we went into the pitch with this data, and we pitched the business and won it. But in the aftermath, a friend of mine in Australia was helping me coordinate the international survey. A guy sent me an email with an article about David Beckham. So David Beckham still is kind of all the rage. But the article called David Beckham a metrosexual. So this friend of mine, Matt, and I were teasing each other about metrosexual. It's a great term. And so we just had this little banter going. And a couple days later, an executive in the office came downstairs. It was late. We were all working late. I was working with Marion. And Michael walked in, and he was like, hair was slicked back, and he was like totally done for the night. He was going out on a date. And Marion started making fun of him because he looked so slick, like he looked like oiled. And I said, "You're such a metrosexual." And she just went, "What?" And so I explained, and the next thing I know, she's got the New York Times on the phone, and she's like, "This is the thing." She had put together, this is her diabolical genius mind. She's like, the results of the survey with this term equal, like that's what we've got here. So she called the New York Times, and she's like, "Yeah, we're having a dinner party Thursday night." This is like Tuesday. She's like, "Can you come?" And this is Warren St. John from the New York Times. And so she gets off the phone, and she's like, "You need to put together a metrosexual dinner party." And I was like, so, and it's funny, in retrospect, it doesn't even, like, the impact, I can't explain the impact of that moment now, because it's now a joke, right? Mm-hmm. But then no one had ever heard the term, and we weren't even yet like really accepting, like men weren't really embracing this new exploration of maybe more traditionally feminine acts or interests. So it was a heroic, amazing effort, I have to say. So I booked a restaurant, beautiful restaurant, and called basically every guy I know. They all happened to be metrosexuals, which was lucky for me. And then I had to convince them to come and be part of a dinner party about this this weird concept, and the New York Times is going to be covering it. So I got guys to come, and some of them brought their girlfriends, and we had this just amazing dinner party. There were probably 16, 18 people there, and the New York Times, and photographers, and it was the cover story of Sunday Styles that weekend. And it was the beginning of, again, this is something that is now just like rote, like Sunday Styles loves, like the mandate, or like they like to identify trends, and it's like always there on the front page of the Sunday Styles. And this article was the beginning of that. It was a huge, it launched metrosexual mania, is what happened. So for the next 6 months, I was on the phone, and Marion was often on the phone, though she still didn't understand it. And she'd be like, "Skylar, come here, just get on, tell the guy." It'd be like the Guardian, and India was really interested, or it was like international press calling about this phenomenon. So I had to become, and I did sort of become, an expert on men. And okay, you have to excuse, here's one thing that's going to happen with these slides. I only had time to give like one example of something that was happening in the culture. So at that time, for example, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy was just coming on the air, and so just like lots of things were happening in the culture to sort of unfold this new more gender neutral male. So So I became interested in masculinity, and then as a result, in femininity and women also. These are actually, so over the next few years, I became something of a gender expert. So these are some clients that I worked with and some projects that I worked on that had mostly to do with gender. And I offer these mainly because, we hear a lot in here about developing an expertise. And sometimes your expertise is like, comes to you in a very strange way. And the thing that was interesting was I became, for a while, the person to call when, like this was the Dockers campaign, Wear the Pants. So I did a whole future of masculinity study for Dockers. For Levi's, I worked on both men's and women's wear. And for beer companies, worked on positioning beer for this new male. I mean, this is a very funny, more refined, more the connoisseur. Volvo was working on a concept car for women, designed by women. And then I've worked a ton in the world of beauty. And I actually love working in the world of beauty. And that's what I do more these days. I don't work as much on the men. I work more on women and femininity and women's issues. So what next? Okay. So, it could have stopped there. Like, so as a result of all of these brands being like confounded and confused by what was going on with gender, all of a sudden we needed people who could talk about what was going on with men and women. And I was one of those people, but it was all it was still born out of, it was still an intellectual conversation. It didn't have anything to, it wasn't an embodied conversation at all that we were having. So I didn't know this. I just thought I was an expert. And I'm just going to give you a little for example. So for example, I know I'm embarrassed about this in retrospect, a lot of these things, and you will find that you'll be embarrassed about a lot of things as you look back over your career. But I was asked by a beauty company who were trying to launch an Axe beauty spray for girls to come in and talk to them about young female sexuality, like teen girls and sex, basically. And I ended up spending about 5 or 6 months with them doing focus groups and ethnographies and really investigating. It wasn't so much teens, they were over 18, but like college-age girls and sex. And we still call that period focus groups gone wild. It was like really out of control work. But so, the conversations were very much in the realm of pop culture, advertising, marketing, communications, all designed to sell product, basically. And they were interesting conversations. I read a lot of books, I had a lot to say on the subject. But then in my mid-30s, I got pregnant. And this is when everything, like, in terms of my understanding of gender, completely fell apart, and in the best possible way. So I was very pregnant, and Cheryl's husband. Anyone met Gary? Mm-hmm. Okay, this is Gary's fault. So I was very pregnant, and I had been managing my pregnancy like so efficiently. I was like on top of everything. I was eating well, I was exercising, I had a plan, we were taking classes, like the whole thing was totally organized. And I massaged once a week, like the whole thing was like really under control. I'm like, this is great. And then one night, Gary sent me an email, and Gary and I are friends. And share a spiritual, an interest in the spiritual path. And he wrote me this beautiful email, which I wanted to call up for you because I don't mind sharing it. I know he wouldn't, but I couldn't really find it. But basically the essence was, I hope, this is like month 8, so it's like coming. The baby's gonna be here soon. It's like, I hope you feel amazing. I know it's radiant and beautiful as the full moon. And just embody the divine feminine that you are. And I was like, holy shit. What is the divine feminine? Oh God, it was like those words. And he was like so sure that I was just walking around embodying the divine feminine. And I was huge. I was like huge, like the full moon. Like all the imagery was correct. I probably looked like the divine feminine, but I was not. So I panicked. I mean, it's funny, right? But it was also like an existential crisis because I'm like, I'm gonna give birth. I don't know how to give birth to a baby. Like I don't even know what it means to be a woman. And so I go. So I had this massage at the time, this shiatsu masseuse. I'm like, she's feminine. She seems like a woman. Because I couldn't even think of any women I knew who seemed like women at that moment. The divine feminine. So, the divine mother. So I went to her and I'm like, do you have any books? Are there any books about the divine feminine? I need to read some fast. I've got like 1 month. So she was a godsend. She was amazing, Brooke. So she's like, oh yeah, you should read The Feminine Face of God, and you should read this book, and you should read this book. I go home like Amazon. I get like books sent to my house. And then she's also like, oh, and you should get into herbs. So she sent me to the store on 9th Street in the East Village, the witchy store. Women's, yeah. This is the best place. It's just this herb store on 9th Street in the East Village, but it's like very witchy. And so I went there, like, ready to give birth. Like, I felt like when I walked in the door, I was like, I should not be here. This is not. It's like energetically, I was having a response to the divine feminine that was in this store. So I didn't know what I was doing. It was all so foreign to me, and I'm like, I had to, I'm like, can you help me, please? So they give me all these herbs, and I just started to relax. Like I went home, I started reading my books. I started to relax and I started cooking things. Like I started doing witchy things, like making potions. This gets more serious, I promise. But it's important to know, like, on this journey, and that's what we're doing. We're doing a gender journey right now. How shocked I was that I realized, first of all, I was managing my pregnancy like a man would, is what I figured out. I was like, it was goal-oriented. It was totally linear. It was totally structured, and like, it was just organized. And I recognized that I was doing that because that's how I'd learned to work. So for 10 years I've been working in corporate America, and I was really efficient, and I was very organized, and I managed things. If I had a project, this is how I would do it. So I basically was treating my pregnancy like a project. I also recognized and was alarmed actually by the fact that I considered myself pretty enlightened, and I use the term loosely, woman, and yet I felt like because of the way I dressed and the clothes I wear and the shoes I wear, or the heels or whatever, I'm like, I'm a woman, obviously. So I recognized with a lot of humility in that moment that there was so much more going on that I had never been taught. And further, everything in the culture was I was being reprogrammed, basically. I was like a pawn in a system so much bigger than me that was encouraging behaviors that were not of the divine feminine. So by the time I gave birth, just to end that story, I felt much better about everything. And then if I needed any further assistance, the birth process itself did a lot of work on that. So that was really, coming out of that, I was a changed person. Yeah. So it's a like very unlikely combination. Never before have these images appeared on the same slide. But this is part of the thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about now. And there's a lot that happened between birth and today, which I think I'll get into later, in terms of how I then further began to investigate the feminine and the masculine and the union of both. But I'm just fascinated whenever something happens in the culture that does touch on the question of gender, at the response and the conversation that happens around it. So at the Academy Awards the other night, Patricia Arquette and the equal pay moment, a big conversation that's happening right now in Hollywood and everywhere else. Sheryl Sandberg, I'm not going to say too much about, though I find that most of her work, I don't think she knows what it means to be a woman. I think she's probably, and this is, I don't know her personally, and if I'm wrong, I hope I get proven wrong. I hope somebody will help me illuminate me, because I would hate to be wrong, but it feels like she's somewhere, she's about where I was before I walked into the witchy store. She's having the conversations that I was having in boardrooms, where I was like, oh, well, you know, because of estrogen, a woman feels more like da-da-da-da, or whatever it was, like these very academic conversations about being a woman in the workplace, that for me are like, it's the wrong conversation that she's having altogether. The root causes, like the whole situation is wrong. And it's not her fault. It's so complex. And I'm not going to solve it. I don't have any answers. But I think we've got to, it's like many of our issues, we've got to, like race, we have to have a better conversation about the thing. And it's going to take us to some very uncomfortable places, because some of the issues around gender are not so easy to stomach at first. I may get into some of those. And I think actually, I'm kind of like really fascinated by 50 Shades of Grey on many levels. I have not read the book, and I probably won't see the movie though. I don't know, maybe. So I probably shouldn't talk about it at all. I have seen the cover and the trailer for the movie, so. But this, I mean, for me, this really illustrates, and you know, for me, pop culture is always, it's the subconscious, like, coming to light. This is like the yin and the yang, the flip side of campus rape. There is so much contained in a story of domination, of the relationship, as I understand it, not having read the book, between these two characters, but it's something that titillates and we want more of, and women and men, you know, we want this this kind of a thing to be happening, you know, with her arms pinned or tied or whatever. But we also are shocked and horrified and outraged at as we should be, at campus rape stories and these kinds of things. But all of this is about a healthy or an unhealthy relationship between the genders. And we can't continue to walk around like cherry picking our entertainment and our news and moralizing like, oh, you know, that's so bad or that's so good, and without like sort of understanding better what it is in the storylines and the relationships that we're responding to.
I have a question about Lean In. Why do you think it got so big then?
PR. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, yeah, she has an incredibly powerful PR engine, which helps. But also, I mean, okay,
her position.
What's that?
It's the only, that's the best we've got.
Yeah, it's all we've got so far, exactly. And I mean, in that way, like, all right, great, Cheryl, that's great. She's choosing to spend her time on this issue. Yes.
I just want to add to that too. I think part of it is also like, even if it is playing what we're going to call a man's role, the situation is like, women have only been entering that space for such a period of time, but they're having to prove themselves in those spaces where it's still very rough.
Yeah.
So, you know, even embodying that kind of authority or using that language doesn't, you know, you're still using the same tools and techniques.
She's using the same tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of female politicians. also.
Yeah, and she's making her argument on their terms,
Yeah.
on the existing terms.
Yeah.
So I think you're right about the root cause thing. It's like,
Yeah.
she's fighting here when it's all happening
Listen,
here.
I mean, and the thing is, like, people can only hear so much, you know, so she wrote something that people were ready to hear, and maybe because of that, we can take it a step further. Somebody can take it a step further. So, you know, I guess it's progress. My concern is, like, that people think that that's all, like, she's taking care of it. That the answer is, like, for me, one of the problems with Lean In is the title. Leaning in, I'm like, so much, and actually this quote too, taking initiative pays off. It's hard to visualize someone as a leader if she's always waiting to be told what to do. I mean, right there you're getting into, like, aspects of the active male principle and the receptive feminine principle, and leaning in a way, it's like it's a masculine idea. So, okay, and I guess I should say this now, though it's probably, maybe it's obvious or maybe not, everybody has within them both masculine and feminine, okay? So when I say masculine, I could be talking about, then there are times when a woman needs to embody the masculine, and there are times when a man needs to embody the feminine. Anyway, there's that. So, I want to just read something to you that I wrote a couple of years ago that I found. I know, it's really, I know, Renzo. I'm just going to get some water, don't worry. Okay. All right. This was an introduction to this was just a piece of writing I think I did on the subway, actually. It's like maybe going to be an essay or maybe going to be something, but I do not consider myself a feminist. I'm a woman who believes gender is not something to be neutralized or overcome, but incorporated at the deepest level of our being. The male-female dynamic is essential to our existence and growth as individuals and as communities. The very existence of our universe is as a result of birth. Out of one came two, male and female, and out of two comes everything else. I had a thought that ultimately compelled me to write this. If aliens of a superior consciousness landed on this planet with the mission of helping us out of our ongoing struggles, a quick assessment of the situation would reveal what is so obvious as to be invisible to those of us mired in it. Gender roles are a mess. As a result, everything is a mess. You want to fix the environment, they'd ask, the economy, the political system, poverty, then fix your experience of the woman or man you are and your relationship to those women and men around you. Until that happens, it's up to us to be the beings of superior consciousness. We have to be those aliens and start fixing it. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not the first person to have had this thought. This is like fundamental to our existence on the planet. But I'm going to share a couple of frameworks with you that have been sort of interesting to me as I've explored this topic. This is spiral dynamics. Anyone? Yeah. So, something that's interesting to me about spiral, okay, I will not go down this path, but we could, at a later date, or if you were interested, talk about even like the whole spiritual, the hero's journey, the whole spiritual path, which is mostly, right now, a masculine construct. But spiral dynamics being a little bit more modern, contemporary, is interesting to me. And there's this idea that there are different strains, like there are different tracks or threads of that as a human, in your human experience, you can develop, that you can practice, that you can master, that you can become better at. And different people are sort of at different levels of development on these different tracks. So I'll just read quickly, like there's emotional, kinesthetic, like movement, morality, creativity, aesthetics, gender, sexuality, empathy, rational, relational, cognitive, spiritual, contemplative, politics. So you could have an enlightened being, a guru, a monk, who's extremely developed on the spiritual front. But for whatever reason, past a lot of too many lifetimes, this person is not all that developed on the sexuality front. And sometimes what can manifest as a result of this is like the guru or, who has like really questionable relationships with students and that kind of thing. We hear it all the time. It happens all the time. Or you have, we all know people who are highly developed in something like aesthetics. Like the first time I saw this concept, I'm not saying this is the answer, I'm just saying it's very interesting to think about. It explained to me why some of my friends, like, I know people who are super, aesthetically developed. And we all do, they have great taste. That's not by accident. Like, we tend to think, what a gift, or they were born with it, but consider the idea that this person's spirit has been working on this for many, many generations and many lifetimes. And ultimately, how interesting to know of yourself where you're less developed and what you could work on. So that's how I interpret this framework, and I love to see that gender was there. I think that's so interesting that we actually, because that was my experience, I didn't just become a woman because I grew up. It wasn't like I was a girl and I grew up and became a woman. It's something you actually have to practice, experiment with. You can get better at it. Anyone who's ever been in a relationship with someone of the same or opposite sex knows that this is the case. We're constantly navigating these polarities, the magnetism, and then the whoosh, what happens when the pole is not, and they're pushing each other away. So gender is something that is an intelligence. It's something that we can learn more about, practice, and get better at. And also in the spiritual path, gender is one path to, not gender so much, but somewhat, to liberation. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go deep into this, but we all have the male and female inside of us. And if you can get to a place where you have a highly developed sense of your own masculinity and a highly developed sense of your own femininity, and you can bring those two together in union, which is what they're doing there symbolically, you attain enlightenment, basically. It's God making love with God. It's the ultimate. So that's just a motivation for you. If you're interested in liberation, you might want to learn a little bit about gender. Anybody want to guess what these two people have in common? Oh. Highly developed masculine and feminine. So on your left, we have the shaman. So in many cultures, like the shaman or the medicine people, is this stuff you guys know? Somewhat. Androgyny, it's like a super spiritual concept actually. I had one teacher say to me, you have to be a very evolved soul to be able to hold the masculine and the feminine in the same container, completely. So a lot of shaman, it was like a very sacred thing that are often very androgynous. And Prince, there we have. One of my favorite contemporary shaman. I've spent a lot of time thinking about Prince, and I won't bore you with that right now. I've written about Prince on the subway also. But I think part of his magic, I've seen him live a lot. Has anyone seen him live? Noah? He's incredible, right?
Yes, yeah, whatever it costs.
Yeah, he's incredible. I went to see Prince in San Jose at a tiny venue many years ago. It was like 15 feet from the stage, with a friend of mine who didn't like Prince. And it was just totally transformative, like taking psychedelic drugs. And she turned around to me at one point, like he's off stage and it's raining purple rain and like there's space. And she's like, okay, now I understand. It was like crazy, like sexual, sensual, masculine, feminine, all coming together on that stage. And that's his magic. So one of the things I just, back to the original, like my opening to this conversation is like just pay attention. I think something that's interesting and important to pay attention to is objectification. So I am really sensitive to the use of the way advertising especially borrows, steals so much of the sacred for the purposes of manipulation, basically. And I think sometimes, I'm not sure, some of it's done unintentionally or unconsciously, and a lot of it's done very consciously. I'm not sure, this pose has become so rote. It's such a part of our collective culture. That's a Victoria's Secret ad? Yeah. But it meant something, both of these, the feminine meant something, the power that these women held in their nakedness and in their beauty and as objects of adoration and power, as a goddess, as a priestess, is being completely stripped away when we objectify women or men. And for me, the idea of objectifying it's about control. We're trying to control, these energies, the masculine and the feminine, are supernatural. They are so intense that we can't really fathom, or we can't contain them. It's that, back to that shaman. To contain both those energies, to have mastered those energies, requires a highly evolved person. So for the rest of us, it's intense. It is overwhelming to actually encounter the masculine in its full form, or the feminine in its full form. And we love it, or we make fun of it, we deride it, we objectify it, we don't fully understand it. I'll tell you who I think and we'll talk about them more in a minute, I think Beyonce's, a lot of the work on her last album was awesome, actually. I don't think I'm the only person who thinks that, but Sheryl Sandberg, just take a page from Beyonce, because this is where Beyonce is yeah, I'm gonna go there. So, I think she's walking a fine line. She's still a pop culture, she's a celebrity, but she's reclaiming a lot of that power. And I think that's awesome and amazing and important. So this was one of my favorite moments in a gender group that I did. This was at the Dockers Future of Masculinity group. So the objectification of women, I think that's kind of an easy target. That's we all get it, right? So I was doing this Future of Masculinity group, and we had at the table, we were in a restaurant, private room, and here we go. We had at the table just such a great group of guys, such a great group of men. There were people from the academic world who study men's issues. There were people who started men's groups, not the Promise Keepers, but you know what I'm talking about, but empowering young men to become men. Kinds of groups. I had a guy who was a butcher and teaching butchery, and a guy from Thrillist. We had masculinity covered from pop culture to academia to spirituality, etc. So there were a lot of men at the table. And one of the guys was one of my favorite cultural commentators. His name is Grant McCracken. He's at MIT, and he's just so good. This is a soundbite. This is what he said. This is not something he wrote. This is exactly what he said. And he said, this is Grant. It feels like the 20th century was, among other things, a gender war. Early on, the suffragettes said the existing asymmetry between the sexes will not work. And men stalled and ignored that notion until about the 1970s. And then you get this great feminist revolution, and every male gets the message. So our entire culture now gets the message of the suffragettes. Everybody gets it. And men are in a state of confusion. They respond sexually to women, but they've gotten the message that they ought not to be explicit or obvious in the attention they give women in their sexual glory. So men are in a real state of confusion until Madonna sounds the all-clear signal with her boy toy video, Material Girl. Up until that moment, women are themselves sort of a little bit conflicted, how sexual can I be? We got into those blunt cut hairdos and kind of desexualized outfits, and women themselves were not trying to send a sexualized message. And men, bless them, were trying not to receive a sexual message. And everybody was kidding themselves until Madonna said, look, women are sexual objects, whether they like it or not. Men are enamored of these sexual objects. Here's the deal. All of this is okay. The sexist terms of reference are okay as long as women are the authors of what happens in this moment of interaction. The problem with sexism is that women didn't control what happened. If they do, it's okay. And then men went, phew, I got it. Now we have an asymmetry. Oh, so we had this asymmetry, and it's not until men agreed to act as sexual objects also that we got real symmetry. We solved sexual asymmetry not by making women less sexual, but by making men more sexual. Jeez. So, I think that's... She's still doing it, by the way. Anyone see that performance? Like, I think of every Madonna video,
Yeah.
she's just got like hordes of men crawling around, lifting her up. So the point I want to make about this is, I never liked Madonna very much, but I do appreciate that she took us, she made men, she started objectifying men. She's like, it's okay. Here's the thing, we're all going to do it to each other. And in a way, it did level the playing field, and I think also laid the groundwork for metrosexuality, and now, you know, everything we've got with the objectification of men. So not necessarily the greatest outcome. It was like, it's like the pendulum sort of like, we got even for a minute. We're like, oh wait, we're in balance, but not maybe at a very profound level. So a few more slides, and then we can like chat. We can really chat. What's the point here? Okay. So gender isn't something to be controlled, but it needs to be. We really, if we're going to get out of the conundrum we're in, I've got to start mastering, channeling, practicing, and becoming better at our genders and the relationship between the genders amongst ourselves and within ourselves. So the ignorance of the qualities of genders, principles, and subtleties can lead to disharmony, even destruction. And so just to kind of like point to, again, what might be obvious, but money is essentially feminine. So if you start to put gender into your thinking around some big social problems, it becomes somewhat interesting, I think. If you think of money as feminine, then the abuse of Wall Street, the culture of Wall Street, starts to make sense. It's like a complete sexual exploitation. It's an orgy, basically, is what's happening. And the women, the money is just, it's a totally passive medium. This scene, I think, is like really powerful in many ways. Again, I didn't see this movie. You don't really have to, by the way. Don't burden yourself with this crappy pop culture. But there's money, technology, and here this is where I'm like I'd love to have a very rich conversation about this with people who actually know better. But the question, you know, we pose these questions like, why aren't there more women in tech? Well, because, I mean, technology, communication, and connectivity, like essentially the internet is feminine in nature. If you look at that great picture about all the connections, like the internet is fluid, it's open, it's ever-changing, it's dynamic, it has many feminine qualities, but the structures that we put in place to manage it and to build it and to harness it are incredibly masculine. Again, very linear, very goal-oriented, and very staccato. Zeros and ones. Like all of these things are, it's like we put a masculine framework around the feminine energy, and we sort of squash the feminine energy. So, I mean, that's one reason there aren't more women in tech. Yes, some more. Relational and social problems arise when gender is corrupted, ignored, or suppressed. Anyone who How many people are married?
Just like
Oh,
that
interesting.
doesn't get thrown.
But the balance, this is like, there is something fundamentally wrong with our genders at home. And I could tell you stories about my own personal experience that, actually I'll tell you one, because it's kind of funny and it's not too revealing, but I am married. So there was a moment, this is after the birth of my child, and I got very interested in Tantra, and I had a Tantra instructor, and there was lots of exploration of the masculine and feminine, and I started to really embrace the receptive nature of the feminine, and I was doing social experiments in my own life and the way I interacted with other people, and trying to be much more receptive, less active, less the actor and more the receiver. And it was really working. It was incredible, actually. So one of the places where I practiced this often was on the dance floor. So I dance a lot, and Tuesday nights, 5 rhythms. Anyway, if you'd like to go,
We have class.
oh, it's probably better for me. So I can continue to express my divine feminine freely. But so I had this period where I was channeling. I was embodied divine feminine, and on the dance floor it was really easy for me to access. Like, I knew how to get there, and the effect on men was frighteningly powerful. So, and I'm not like average. I'm average. I'm not like a supermodel. I'm fine. But when I was embodying this feminine, I had men like literally tripping over themselves, could not get enough of it. It was actually like I had to like fend people off. And I can tell you what I was doing, girls, by the way, if you really want to know. Likewise, I will say in this period, and it was really interesting to me, and something that I continue to explore and would like to understand better, I could also sense when I was in the presence of men who were absolutely embodied the masculine principle. It's very rare. It is very rare to run across someone embodying the feminine or the masculine. It happens in moments, or it happens on the dance floor, or it happens. But if I came into contact with it, there was a physical effect, like being knocked at the back of the knees. Like I wanted to actually bow down. Be at the feet of that man. And these are like very physical experiences. It's an energetic experience. So I was experimenting with all of this on the dance floor and in my work also. I had a client at this time who, this was my first job back after my pregnancy, and I'm in this space. I'm just like, I got a baby, I'm breastfeeding, I'm like so divine feminine. And my client was flat rate moving. So there's a bunch of movers, Israeli movers. And I had meetings like every time we met. It was all men. It was like 5, 6 men. And I would just like radiate feminine. Whereas in the past, I might have been more like, it was hard to get a word in edgewise. They were, rapid fire. They had plans. They were like men of action. They were movers. They're strong. And I could feel this internal battle happening where I'm like, you're a consultant. You should be talking more. You should be solving the problems. You should be volunteering solutions. And instead, I became very receptive, like energetically. I was allowing space for whatever needed to happen in the meeting to happen, and it was magic. And my client actually said to me at one point, I was like, "Do you need me anymore? I mean, you guys have like," he was just paying me every month, and he's like, "No. You have to be the meetings. Like, I don't know what you do, but you've got to be there. It's like magic." So this was all working. By the way, I'm not in it anymore. It comes and goes. But so I went home and I realized, I went to my teacher at this point, and I'm like, I figured it all out. Like now I get it. I get the energies. I get how they're working. I know when I'm in the feminine. I know when other people are in the feminine or masculine. I get it. and my marriage was rough. I mean, marriage is hard. So he's like, great, now go home and do it. And I was like, oh, no. He's like, that same thing you're doing in the meetings where you're letting the men take the initiative, try it at home. I was like, oh, I can't do that. I run everything. He can't, he's incompetent. I can't. I'm like, but what if I've married an incompetent man? He's gonna take us down the path of disaster. And he's like, you married him. Like, your job is to follow him. And I was like, oh, Jesus, this is gonna be really tricky. So I started with, this is the story, this is the end of the story, this tangent. We were going, my husband is a terrible driver, because he's a New Yorker and he learned to drive when he was 30, and I've been driving since I was like 14, so the car is like a major battleground for us. So the minute we get in a car, first of all, I usually drive, which is, at the wheel, like very masculine, and so we were going to Connecticut to visit some friends, and I'm like, you drive. And he likes to drive, but I sit in the passenger seat like, oh, God, no. So like, why don't you drive? So I let him drive, and we're like navigating to Connecticut, and he takes a wrong turn, and I'm like, oh. It's fine. He's like, do you think I should get back on? I'm like, yes, do what you want. You're doing great. You're great. I was like, so like, he was the king of that car. I was like the subject. I was like, I don't care if we never get to Connecticut. I am just gonna do whatever. You are in charge. You're in charge. You get us there. So we got there. We had several wrong turns, and we finally arrived. It was so funny to me. He had no idea what was going on. None. He was so happy when we arrived, and we got lost a few times, and he's like, that was really a good drive. It wasn't so bad, was it? That was a good drive. It was awesome. And it was just funny to me. It was like, he didn't understand. Well, I was orchestrating this, but there was such harmony. He was a changed man as a result of me changing my response to him. And that was the most success I've had so far. Baby steps, okay? Baby steps. No, I'm kidding. Poor Peter. He's awesome. What am I going to do? So, let's see. Yeah, I guess I'll just, I'm just going to end here, because for me this is an idea that I'm still trying to sort out, and I think it's central, and I invite your commentary and your observations as you move out into the world on this subject especially. So since the beginning, the dawn of time, there has been a very direct relationship between fertility and prosperity. And we've lost the thread on that. Like, I don't think anyone really ever thinks about, not anyone ever really thinks about it, but it's rarely, in my experience, discussed. So, anybody know about Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage? So, as far back as we know, and definitely in ancient Babylon, Sumer, and these places, so that's like 5,000 years ago, more, 6,000 years ago, and further. There was an annual rite called the sacred marriage, where the priestess of the temple had union with the king of the land. And as part of the ceremony, and this is where I'm not a scholar of this stuff. I'm an amateur scholar, so please check your facts. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But as far as I understand it, and I have done a lot of reading on this, so there were temple priestess, there were temple prostitutes, basically, sacred prostitutes. And men came to the temple, and this is actually in the origins of money. This is like the earliest were that the people of the men of the land would come to the temple, pay their money, and get a visit with one of these prostitutes. And teacher of mine was asking me, we were discussing this concept, and he's like, why do you think they came to the temple to see these prostitutes? And I'm like, I don't really know. He's like, for sex? He's like, yeah, I guess so. No, he said, they could get sex anywhere. It wasn't for sex. It was for this particular kind of sex that these women were trained to have, that was like an energetic, like a healing experience for the men. And the purpose was to ensure the prosperity of the land. The men were farming, the men were fighting, the men were charged with keeping the communities safe and food on the tables, etc. And these women in this act were clearing them and empowering them in their masculinity, and in the union creating fertility and prosperity for the community. So super sacred stuff happening in these temples, all related to the union of masculine and feminine principles in a particular way, and tied to money, actually, exchange of money. So we've kind of lost that, you know. We don't have, like, it's so rare for us to have this divine union of the masculine and feminine anymore. For them it was happening at least once a year with the king and the priestess. And then also, I don't know how often, but on a regular basis for just the men of the community. And I think it just occurred to me, I was like, I've been so fascinated by Beyonce and Jay-Z and the power that they have as a couple, and thinking they sort of represent the Hieros Gamos in a way. They are acting out for us on the public stage the sacred act of the union of a highly developed masculine and a highly developed feminine who are in marriage, who are in relationship, literally and also mythologically in a way. So there's something really important for us culturally, and this is what we do. That's why we have Star Wars now. You know, we act out our mythology in popular culture, basically. So I just invite you to think about gender a little bit deeper and really consider, like, when there are these moments in the culture that have a lot of potency, and are related to sexuality or to gender, gender roles. What is going on there? Like, what is really going on? Because it's going to be deep, for sure. So that's my presentation for the evening.